Please help me reach 1,500 subscribers. The phone rang while I stood at the sink, staring at the fading glow of dusk reflected in the kitchen window. I hesitated before answering. It was late, and the house had finally settled into that familiar nighttime stillness. My husband was stretched out on the couch in the living room, drifting in and out of sleep, the TV murmuring softly in the background. I dried my hands on a dish towel and picked up the phone, turning slightly away, my voice automatically quiet. "Did you decide?" the voice on the other end asked. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the urgency, the familiarity, the feeling it stirred, something I hadn't allowed myself to confront in years. "Yes," I said before I could stop myself. "I picked you." The words slipped out so naturally that it took a second for their weight to register. Then the room felt different, like the air had been drained from it. My pulse jumped, not from excitement but from a sudden, crushing fear. Behind me the television went silent. I turned slowly. My husband was standing now, the remote hanging loosely from his fingers. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was clear. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't have to. He had heard enough. "I'll call you later," I murmured into the phone and ended the call. We stood there in complete silence. It was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking above the stove. I tried to speak, desperate to explain, to soften what he'd heard with context and excuses and history. But before I could say a word, he lifted his hand, not sharply, not in rage. "Don't," he said quietly. He looked at me the way someone looks at a house they once loved, realizing it's no longer theirs. Without another word, he turned and walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. I followed him, my thoughts racing ahead, rehearsing apologies that already felt pointless. He packed calmly, folding his shirts with care, rolling his socks the way he always had. His composure terrified me more than shouting ever could. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching years of our life disappear into a suitcase. "It's not what it sounded like," I finally said, hating how fragile my voice was. He paused, then nodded once. "It's exactly what it sounded like." He zipped the bag, lifted it, and walked past me. At the doorway he stopped. For a moment I thought he might turn around. Ask for an explanation. Give me one chance to undo everything. Instead he said, "I hope someday you understand why I can't stay." And then he left. The night stretched endlessly after that. I sat on the couch where he'd been sleeping just an hour earlier, staring at the dark television screen. I replayed the sentence over and over, searching for a version of it that didn't sound like betrayal. But words carry weight. Once spoken, they don't bend. The truth was messier than the moment itself. The call had been from someone I loved long ago, before my marriage, before routines, before responsibility slowly wore passion down. That love had never truly vanished. It had just been buried, waiting. When he came back into my life, it felt like waking a part of myself I had hidden away. Loving someone in your head is one thing. Choosing them out loud is another. That sentence, "I chose you," was the line between imagination and action. And my husband had heard me cross it. Days turned into weeks. I called. I texted. I left messages I knew he wouldn't hear. I convinced myself he just needed time, that eventually he'd come back so we could talk like people who had built a life together. He never did. Friends stopped asking how I was after a while. Some avoided me entirely. Others looked at me with pity, which somehow hurt more than judgment. At night, I lay alone, staring at the empty side of the bed, remembering how he used to reach for me in his sleep, as if afraid I might vanish. I thought often about that sentence, how careless it had been and how honest. I realized the marriage didn't end because of another person. It ended because I had already chosen someone else in my heart long before the phone ever rang. Months later, I saw him unexpectedly at the grocery store. He looked different, older maybe, but steadier. He noticed me, hesitated, then gave a polite nod. We stood near the produce section, two strangers carrying the same past. "I'm sorry," I said because there was nothing else left to say. He studied me for a moment, then offered a small, tired smile. "I know. I never wanted you to hear that," I added. "I know that too," he replied. "But I'm glad I did." That hurt more than anything, not because he was cruel but because he was right. He walked away with his cart, leaving me standing among apples and oranges, holding on to the echo of a sentence that had changed everything. I learned then that marriages don't always end in shouting or slam doors. Sometimes they end quietly, with a single sentence spoken into a phone, overheard by the one person who needed to hear it most. And sometimes the one who walks away is the one who finally understands the truth, while the one who stays is left behind to live with it.